Here's the story of how a scheduling mistake at the Australian Open became tennis's biggest controversy, and why Novak Djokovic's response reveals everything wrong with how we discuss race and fairness in professional sports. What really happened between Alex Eala, the WTA, and tennis's biggest star isn't what the headlines claimed. Alexandra Eala made history at the 2026 Australian Open as the first Filipino player to ever compete in the main draw of this Grand Slam tournament. At just 20 years old, she'd already become the highest-ranked Filipino tennis player in history, sitting at world number 49 when she stepped onto court 6 in Melbourne. What followed was absolute chaos that exposed deep divisions in tennis culture and sparked debates about everything from proper etiquette to alleged discrimination.
So things like that happen. I mean, it's you could argue that it was, maybe a poor schedule and maybe they could schedule him on a bigger court. Yes, but again, she's Alex Eala. That's been a talk, and which is understandable. There's some players coming from respective countries, like she's coming from Philippines, which is now a big deal. She's been the biggest ever, tennis player from that country, which is a big country, and there's a big...
The problem started before Eala even hit her first serve. Tournament organizers scheduled her opening round match against American Alycia Parks on court 6, one of the smallest venues at Melbourne Park with a capacity of less than 1,500 spectators. This decision would prove monumentally short-sighted. From the moment gates opened at Melbourne Park, fans streamed toward court 6 in unprecedented numbers. By lunchtime, a massive line to enter the court snaked around the entire perimeter and throughout much of the grounds. These weren't just casual tennis fans looking for entertainment. These were passionate Filipino supporters who'd traveled from across Australia and beyond to witness history in the making. Melbourne has more than 400,000 residents with Filipino heritage, making it one of the largest Filipino communities outside the Philippines. When their tennis hero finally made it to a Grand Slam main draw, they showed up in force. The scenes were unlike anything tournament organizers had anticipated or prepared for. Inside court 6, the atmosphere was electric from the very first point. Every time Eala won a point, wild celebrations erupted throughout the packed venue. Philippine flags filled every available space in the stands. Chants of "Let's go, Alex" echoed across the grounds so loudly they could be heard from neighboring courts. Even routine exchanges during warm-ups met with deafening roars that rippled throughout Melbourne Park. But the passion of Eala's supporters quickly became controversial. These fans weren't following traditional tennis etiquette. They loudly cheered every error made by her opponent Alycia Parks, including unforced errors and double faults. They clapped between first and second serves. They made noise during points instead of waiting for natural breaks in play. The chair umpire warned the crowd no fewer than 6 times during the match to stop disrupting play. This behavior shocked tennis purists and created an uncomfortable situation for both players. Alycia Parks later admitted the atmosphere was extremely difficult to navigate. "It was very difficult," she said with a smile after winning the match. "It was like I was expecting it, but I wasn't. She definitely has a good crowd." Parks tried to remain diplomatic about the crowd's conduct. "It definitely wasn't the worst," she said. "But in between first and second serves and the clapping when you miss, that's just something I had to ignore and get used to the whole match." The tennis community split in their reactions. Many criticized the Filipino fans for their breach of tennis etiquette.
Alex a little bit annoyed now. That's the second time that has happened with that same linesman.
Social media exploded with comments like, "It's too much what the crowd is doing, cheers midpoint and distracting the opponent. It shouldn't be allowed." And Filipino fans showed massive love for Alex Eala. But remembering tennis etiquette is also very important. Cheering for opponent errors or making noise while the ball was still in play is a big no-no in tennis. Others defended the passionate support as a cultural expression that tennis needed to embrace. One supporter wrote back, "That is how we celebrate and support one of our own on the world stage. Why conform to the standards of people from other countries?" But the bigger controversy wasn't about fan behavior, it was about the tournament's decision to schedule such a massive draw on such a small court. Tennis journalists and fans immediately criticized the organizers for their poor planning. "Putting Eala on court 6 is just dumb," wrote tennis journalist Jose Morgado, a sentiment that spread rapidly across social media. The criticism was justified. Court 6 is known as a party court designed for casual matches, not for accommodating the kind of massive crowd that a historic player like Eala would naturally attract. The venue that could barely seat 1,000 people was completely overwhelmed by demand that could have easily filled the KIA arena with its 5,000 capacity or even larger show courts. Carl Santamaria, a former Philippine national team coach based in Australia, provided crucial context for understanding what went wrong. The organizers probably didn't foresee the magnitude of the situation. They should have put Alex on a bigger court, he explained. But he also acknowledged that Filipino tennis fans were still learning the sport's cultural expectations. The Filipino crowd is loud. I could understand that. But tennis fans are still in their infancy, I would say. Santamaria emphasized that the crowd's behavior came from enthusiasm, not malice. Of course, there are shortcomings of the Filipino crowd, but there are also shortcomings of the organizers, he noted, pointing out that the chaos could have been avoided with better planning. Tennis Australia defended their scheduling decision through spokesperson Prue Ryan, who said organizers considered multiple factors when making court assignments. After weighing all factors, including the significant popularity of a range of players, Court 6 was the best option in terms of capacity and accessibility, she stated. The accessibility argument included standing room on a new highline structure, but this clearly wasn't adequate for the unprecedented demand. The match itself told a story of missed opportunity and mounting pressure. On paper, Eala appeared to have every advantage over the 99th-ranked Parks. She dominated the opening set, looking every bit the favorite that her ranking suggested she should be. But as the crowd's energy intensified and the pressure mounted, something shifted. Parks found her rhythm behind a booming service game that completely overwhelmed Eala. The American finished with 12 aces compared to just one from the Filipino star. More telling was Eala's struggle on break points. Throughout the contest, she converted only 4 of her 17 breakpoint opportunities, a statistic that revealed how the pressure may have affected her performance. The final score of 6-0, 3-6, 2-6 to Parks represented a devastating reversal for Eala, who'd looked completely in control during the first set. After the match, she was immediately escorted from the court by heavy security, surrounded by as many as a dozen guards to manage the crowd. This is where Novak Djokovic entered the story and where the narrative took an unexpected turn. 3 days after Eala's match, during a press conference following his own second-round victory, Djokovic was asked about the attendance and crowd issues at the tournament. His response was measured, supportive, and focused on the positive aspects of tennis's growing global appeal. Having too much crowd on this or any other tennis tournament is a very good problem to have, Djokovic said. I think there are much worse problems to have. Rather than criticizing anyone involved, he praised the international interest that players like Eala were bringing to the sport. There's some players coming from respective countries like she's coming from the Philippines, which is now a big deal, Djokovic continued. She's been the biggest ever tennis player from that country, which is a big country and there's a big interest. So things like that happen. The only criticism Djokovic offered was mild and constructive, focused on logistics rather than any deeper issues. I mean, you could argue that it was maybe a poor schedule and maybe they could schedule her on a bigger court. His tone throughout was supportive of both Eala and the growing diversity in tennis audiences. Djokovic went even further in emphasizing the positive aspects of the situation. It's a good sign. We want more attention. We want more people coming, and we want more people watching tennis live and following it and live streaming, he added, making clear that he viewed the controversy as a sign of tennis's healthy growth. These measured, supportive comments from Djokovic were a far cry from the explosive accusations of racial bias that some headlines suggested. He never accused the WTA of mistreating Eala. He never claimed there was racial discrimination involved in the scheduling decision. He simply acknowledged that organizers could have handled the logistics better while celebrating the international interest that players like Eala bring to tennis. The real story here isn't about racial bias or deliberate mistreatment, it's about the growing pains that tennis faces as it becomes more globally popular and diverse. Alex Eala represents something genuinely historic for Philippine sports. She's not just the first Filipino to reach a Grand Slam main draw, she's become a genuine superstar whose online presence dwarfs even established champions like Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner. A video of her pre-tournament press conference attracted views in the 6 figures, demonstrating the massive global interest in her story. When she reached a career-high ranking of world number 40 just weeks after the Australian Open, it cemented her status as not just a Filipino pioneer, but a legitimate force in women's tennis. The lessons from this controversy extend far beyond one tournament or one match. Other organizers have clearly learned from the Australian Open's mistakes. When the Qatar Open scheduled Eala later in 2026, they made sure to give her a prominent court assignment that could accommodate her massive following. This decision vindicated critics who argued that the Australian Open had badly mishandled the situation. For Eala herself, the experience provided valuable lessons about managing expectations and pressure at the highest level. "Yeah, it's a process to take it all in," she reflected afterward. "I think this week definitely there were elements that were a bit overwhelming, especially during my practices. I didn't expect that many people to be there. So it's a learning process. Like anything." She also understood the broader significance of her presence at the tournament. "I guess this is one of the moments that I can reflect on what this means for Philippine tennis," she said. "I'm the only Filipina in the draw this year. I'm the only Filipina that's ever been in the draw, I think." The controversy ultimately revealed more about tennis culture and media narratives than it did about any systematic discrimination. While the tournament organizers clearly made a mistake in scheduling, there's no evidence that this mistake was motivated by racial bias rather than simple miscalculation of Eala's popularity. The passionate behavior of Filipino fans while breaking tennis etiquette represented a cultural expression of support that tennis will need to navigate as the sport continues to grow globally. Different cultures celebrate sports differently, and tennis's traditionally quiet, reserved atmosphere may need to evolve to accommodate more diverse and enthusiastic fan bases. Djokovic's measured response demonstrated how established stars can support emerging players and growing international interest without feeding into manufactured controversies. His focus remained on the positive aspects of tennis's growth while acknowledging practical improvements that could be made. What happened at the 2026 Australian Open wasn't a scandal about racial bias or deliberate mistreatment. It was a perfect storm of poor planning, cultural differences, and unprecedented popularity that exposed both the challenges and opportunities facing modern professional tennis. Alex Eala's historic appearance created problems that organizers weren't prepared to handle, but it also demonstrated the sport's potential for global growth and cultural impact. The real story is about a young champion breaking barriers, passionate fans expressing their support in unfamiliar ways, and a sport learning to accommodate its own success. That's a much more complex and interesting narrative than the simple accusations of discrimination that dominated early coverage. As tennis continues to evolve and attract more diverse global audiences, the lessons from Alex Eala's Australian Open debut will likely prove more valuable than any manufactured controversy about bias or mistreatment.